Kia ora tātou, talofa lava, kia orana, bonjour, bula, good morning everyone. Today I'm going to introduce you to the first regional action plan for seabirds for Oceania. My name is Karen Baird and I am the Threatened and Migratory Species Advisor for the Secretariat for the Pacific Regional Environment Programme. SPREP is an intergovernmental organisation and one of the Council of Regional Organisations of the Pacific, or CROP agencies. Our members are the 21 Pacific Island countries and territories, as well as the 5 metropolitan countries with territories in the Pacific of Australia, France, New Zealand, the UK and the USA. SPREP's role is to provide environmental advice services to our Pacific members, a bit like a public service for Pacific countries. BirdLife International is a global partnership with NGOs supporting biodiversity conservation, especially for birds. And in the Pacific, there are 5 BirdLife partners. The Northern New Zealand Seabird Trust, based in New Zealand, focuses on seabird research and conservation, primarily in Northern New Zealand. Marine species are iconic in the Pacific, playing an integral role in culture and traditions. Since 2003, SPREP has worked with Pacific Island countries and territories to produce a series of marine species action plans for migratory marine species groups, whales and dolphins, dugong, and marine turtles. In 2017, another species group was added for sharks and rays. Working with our partner, BirdLife International's Mark O'Brien and Steph Burrell, and with expert input from Chris Gaskin from the Northern New Zealand Seabird Trust, we have developed the first action plan for the Pacific for seabirds. The Pacific Ocean is vast, the largest continuous marine habitat on the planet, covering around 32 million square kilometres of ocean. There is a huge range of migratory marine species, many threatened with extinction. Some, like the humpback whale, are recovering slowly from industrial-scale exploitation, while others are now at risk from this type of exploitation, such as sharks and rays and some seabirds. Pacific peoples have a long history of utilising their marine resources for their livelihoods, and many communities still harvest these species. But changes such as population increase, methods of exploitation, as well as environmental degradation and climate change are impacting the sustainability of these resources. Some seabird species are still harvested, for example, collared petrels, tern eggs, and wedge-tailed shearwaters. Pacific governments consider their sustainable harvest as important for food security. One project that SPREP is funding BirdLife to undertake involves investigating the harvest of wedge-tailed shearwaters, or corallico, in Vanuatu, and to produce a management plan in collaboration with the community while establishing a long-term monitoring program. 42 species of seabird are known or suspected to breed in the Pacific. 17 of these are endemic. There are also undescribed taxa and taxonomic uncertainty over others. For example, only one specimen of the Samoan storm petrel exists, and it is in an American museum. Birds migrating across the Pacific equator number in the millions, and as many as 60 species of seabirds that breed outside the region have been recorded there. The conservation status of seabirds is of high concern in the Pacific. There are 3 critically endangered species, 2 for which their breeding grounds remain unknown, and a further 3 are endangered, with 5 more listed as vulnerable, and 1 species which is near threatened. And this list doesn't take into account the taxonomic uncertainty or undescribed taxa mentioned already. The most significant land-based threat to seabirds remains invasive predator species. However, the scale and threat of other threats is largely unknown and will vary between island groups and species. For some species that breed on low-lying atolls, sea level rise and other climate-related impacts may be the most serious long-term threat. For example, the phoenix petrel breeding on low-lying atolls in Kiribati. Extreme weather events will also exacerbate habitat erosion and loss. For the marine environment, it too depends on the species. Incidental bycatch, for example, is significant for some species that migrate through the region. For example, the Antipodean albatross is highly threatened from interactions with longline vessels. Conservation challenges for all migratory marine species across the Pacific are significant, and I have highlighted a few here. Lack of data and information, including basic population parameters, migration routes, and long-term data sets. Absence and lack of ongoing and long-term research, survey and monitoring programs. Limited in-country capacity to provide leadership in marine species research and conservation management. And lack of resources, including accessing sustained funding. The Seabird Action Plan has 8 themes with objectives and identified actions to achieve the objectives. A number of actions benefit all migratory marine species in the program, so are part of the general multi-species action plan. Responsibility for actions lies not just with SPREP and SPREP member states, but also with partner NGOs and the private sector, as well as funding agencies. Scientists also have an important role in helping to fill critical knowledge gaps in supporting Pacific countries with scientific capacity building. Despite the huge challenges that the Pacific faces, there is already work being undertaken in the Pacific by governments and NGOs, including BirdLife partners, which will benefit seabirds. During a workshop on marine species program held last year, presentations by SPREP and partners outline progress being made. Invasive species management is being scaled up through the Pacific Regional Invasive Species Management Support Service, or PRISMS, which began in 2019. Already rodents have been successfully eradicated from 85 islands in the Pacific. Through funding from SPREP, BirdLife has been able to extend a port-based outreach program in Suva, providing advice and outreach on seabird bycatch mitigation on longline vessels. In French Polynesia, work is begun by BirdLife International partner Sok Manu with local NGO Raumatariki to study rapa shearwater and begin the process of rat eradications to protect rapa shearwater and other threatened seabirds. In the Cook Islands, Te Pukurua Society are undertaking survey and monitoring of seabird nesting sites, including establishing acoustic monitoring sites. In Fiji, work on Fiji petrel continues, led by Makaraveti Nature Fiji. Research in Hawaii on Hawaiian petrel and Newell shearwater and American Samoa on Tahiti petrel is being undertaken by Archipelago Research. In New Caledonia, research tracking the wedge-tail shearwater has identified important areas that these birds forage and should be taken into consideration when establishing large marine protected areas. Some initial work on Beck's petrel was also undertaken a few years ago after managing to catch one bird. It was tracked for several months, identifying a number of possible breeding locations which need following up. But from very many Pacific Island countries and territories, little seabird work has been undertaken at all. A variety of species that breed in New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, and Japan and migrate through the Pacific have been tracked. For example, Kermadec petrels, streaked shearwater, wedge-tail shearwater, sooty shearwater, flesh-footed shearwater, and picos petrel. These species provide an important part of the picture of seabird diversity in the Pacific and how the ocean is utilised as well as highlighting threats from overfishing and potential new threats such as from deep sea mining. A core foraging area for picos petrel, for example, has been found in the EBSA identified as the Clarion-Clipperton fracture zone. Other species are also known from this site, including black-winged petrels. This zone is also where intensive exploration for deep-sea minerals is taking place. SPRET will have some funding available from next year to initiate seabird monitoring training in the region, including development of a regional seabird monitoring manual and holding training workshops. Seabird scientists have extensive experience in seabird conservation, and we would welcome opportunities to collaborate with experts to assist with capacity building in the region. BirdLife will also update and expand their seabird colony database through this funding opportunity. It is anticipated that our new 2022 to 2026 plan series will be available early this year. We would very much welcome the support of seabird scientists in the region to help with its implementation. Thanks very much for listening.